Now, if Denise, will you please introduce Jane? Thank you.
I'm very happy to. Jane, we're delighted that you were able to join us, especially during the season of creation. I've had the privilege of working with Jane over the last few years, and she's currently the Laudato Si Officer with Tròcaire, which, as we know, is our overseas development agency. It's yes, the development agency of the Catholic Church. And previous to that, Jane was a pastoral worker for many years in parish ministry. And she brings the combination of both those things together, I've discovered. So, Jane, you have a wonderful gift of being able to share really complex ideas in terms of the creation story and subsequent, so many complex ideas, but you put it so simply, and it's underpinned by Laudato Si. I haven't met anyone who is able to share Laudato Si with that same enthusiasm or energy. And I know that each time I came away from our sessions, last year during the lockdown, Jane ran a series of book clubs all over the country, and it was terrific. And that sort of mobilized me into more action to do, to actually do something. But what most important, and I think today is the feast of the exaltation of the cross, where there's death and destruction, and we watched a video clip during our evening prayer. There is, as Colm said, a tsunami coming towards us, and yet there's the hope. People are uniting, people are working together. And so Jane has that ability to give us the facts, but also then to say, what can we do? What can I do? So Jane, we're delighted to have you and look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks
we could
so
all
much.
clap.
Thanks so much, Denise, and good evening, everyone. And just thanks so much for inviting me. Delighted to be here with you this evening. I'm just going to share my screen one moment, and hopefully this is all working okay. Feel free to interrupt me, somebody, if there is a problem. So yeah, we're in the season of creation, and as Colm mentioned, the theme, he mentioned the correct theme, the international theme, which is a home for all, renewing the oikos of gods. And in Ireland, we decided to simplify the theme a little bit and go with restoring our common home, but very much on the same ideas. So this evening, I thought I'd just share with you, first of all, some snippets from Laudato Si. And I know there's familiar faces on the call this evening, and many of you are really familiar with Laudato Si, but I find it's a document that we can come back to again and again and just gain new insights every time. So I'll just give some reflections from Laudato Si, and then maybe describe our current situation in terms of where we are at the moment in relation to the environmental crisis, and talk about the season of creation and some action points. So that's the plan. And Laudato Si begins with these beautiful words, opens, of course, with "Praise be to you, my Lord," from the prayer of St. Francis, and that's where the document gets its title. And it's very much grounded and rooted in the spirituality of St. Francis. And the opening verse there, St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. And published in 2015, the document's now 6 years old, very much a groundbreaking document. It was published just a few months before the signing of the Paris Climate Agreement, that very important international agreement on climate. And many would say it contributed greatly to the signing of that agreement by 195 countries. I think it's the only papal encyclical to have made it onto the New York Times top 10 bestseller list, and has been just read far and wide by believers and non-believers. And it really is a beautiful document. So I suppose it's a gift. It's a gift to the church, to all of us. It's a gift to the world, and it doesn't do everything, but it's it was a long awaited encyclical on ecology, and still is driving so much action that I'm going to share with you today as well. And I suppose if you were to sum it up in the 5 chapters, it's really urging us to listen to the signs of the times in light of the gospel. And what are those signs of the times? You know, so Pope Francis says, our sister cries out to us and urges us to listen to the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor, listen to the science. The document is very much rooted in the science. To listen to the call of our faith, to respond, and to listen to the youth of the world. And throughout the document, there are many themes that we could draw out and speak about this evening. And as Denise mentioned, during lockdown, I spent my time in book clubs with people on Zoom, and over 300 people across the country went through that book club experience over the past year. And you know, we spent 6 weeks exploring Laudato Si, and you could spend even more time than that. Every time I came back into a book club with a new group, there was something else that would pop out at me. So it's just so rich and such a life-giving document. It asks us to look at the signs of the times, and what are those signs? And just, we could dwell on this, and I won't, just a couple of slides on it. We're all very aware of what's happening in the world now. The awareness around the environmental crisis has definitely reached its tipping point. It's in the media, it's in our news feeds, it's out there. And I suppose the most recent shock in the environmental movements was the latest IPCC report released in August. And this is a report that's released every year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. But this year was different. And the language in that report this year was really startling. It was extremely strong. It made statements that were conclusive, definite. As the science and the data evolves, this was bringing things, I suppose, to a sort of culmination in terms of this is where we are at. And it made the headlines of newspapers all around the world. And just to draw out a few of the things it mentioned, it said, there is now no doubt that human activity is causing our planet to warm. The impacts are being felt across all regions, all systems, and it will get worse. It said the changing climate is causing parts of the world to become uninhabitable for human beings. But it also said, if governments take immediate action now, we can steer onto a different path. There is still time to change course. And that quote from the report, it said, strong and sustained reductions in emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases would limit climate change. And these images are not from countries in the global south. These images are on the top left from Germany, on the top right, I think it's either the USA or Canada in the summer. And on the bottom there, I actually don't know where that beach is, but the point being that we are seeing the effects of the environmental crisis across all regions now. And just a few statistics there, and I'll leave the statistics there then after this, but you know, we had the Living Planet report in 2020 that said 68% of wildlife had been destroyed in the last few decades due to human activity. This is not due to the natural evolution of things. This summer, temperatures reaching 50 degrees in parts of USA and Canada, and in Death Valley, I think it went to 55, and it was the hottest temperature ever recorded. And then we know the situation with plastic, you know, 8 million pieces making their way into our oceans every day. And then in Europe this summer, flash floods killing 250 people and causing 10 billion euros worth of damage. And thousands of people were displaced in those floods. We tend not to use the word displaced in this part of the world, but that is what happened in Germany, Belgium, and Holland. thousands of people lost their homes this year because of climate change. So climate scientists have long warned this would happen, that these emissions would cause more floods, heat waves, droughts, and so on. But this past year, the latest spikes have gone beyond even their predictions. So it's grim, and the report is clear that this is only going in one direction, and that's to get worse. Now, to go back to Laudato Si, Pope Francis makes some radical calls in Laudato Si, and he's very much a leader in terms of climate and speaking out. And one of the things he says in the document is that we know the technology based on the use of fossil fuels needs to be replaced without delay. And since Laudato Si has been published in 2018 and 2019, he also invited the CEOs of the major fossil fuel corporations to the Vatican, and they went. And he gave them a real dressing down. He said, you have no right to steal the future from younger generations. You must change course. You must switch direction in terms of our energy needs. Yes, civilization needs energy, but energy should not destroy civilization. So he really is trying to move hearts and minds on this particular issue since then. And just some good news, like there's a global divestment movement, which very much involves institutional church. And for many years, religious congregations, especially female religious, have set up these ethical investment funds or moved assets away from the fossil fuel industry. And this is known as divestment. And globally, this movement has taken something astronomical like $15 trillion away from the fossil fuel industry, really affecting their shares, their prices, and moving investment towards renewables in the process. And the church is a tiny part of this divestment movement, but faith groups make up 30% of that divestment movement, which is something to be really proud of. Interfaith groups, but the Catholic Church is part of that. And last May, for the celebration of the 6th anniversary of Laudato Si, 6 Irish dioceses joined that divestment movement, and the Diocese of Limerick was one of them. And just this quote from Bishop Leahy is quite good. He says, listening to the cry of humanity, the cry of creation, and the cry of young people, it became clear our diocese could not continue its investments in fossil fuel related funds. Together in practical steps, we can console our planet's cry, and fossil fuel divestment is such a step. So this isn't about, the monetary amount is small, but it's the witness and it's the taking away of the social license of these companies who are driving this crisis. There's no doubt about that. So this global divestments movement is positive. You might recall in 2018, the Irish government became the first government in the world to divest, and that was followed a few months later by the Irish Bishops' Conference. But I think it's over 50 Irish congregations have also divested. So in terms of that fossil fuel issue, church is very much witnessing to how to move forward, and it's a good news piece as well. And another thing Laudato Si calls for is the move to a circular economy, and I think we can all, it'd be good to chat about this after as well, like what comes to mind when you think of a circular economy. But Pope Francis there on the World Day of Prayer for Creation a few years back said, we must move quickly and decisively towards a form of clean energy and a sustainable circular economy. And he talks about this in Laudato Si as well, but the production line of goods and I suppose throwaway culture and simple things like the ability of certain appliances to be repaired and so on. Even think of clothes and the use of charity shops and so on. So, I think this is becoming more and more popular, especially with younger people. to think about this production line and how we can reuse and recycle and so on. Everything, like every time we purchase something, to really think about this. So divestment and the move to a circular economy are certainly things that Laudato Si is pushing forward. And just another reflection on this, you know, as Christians, we very much live by the mantra to love our neighbor as ourselves. And just that question I always ask in these presentations is, what does love of neighbor look like in an era of ecological breakdown? And I think it's so important to listen to what Pope Francis calls the cry of the poor, and to see those people that are on the front lines of the crisis. So, you know, the victims of climate disasters, those who are displaced because of disasters, drought, water, food insecurity. And in the Gospels, Jesus always sides with the oppressed. And we are driven, and in Tròcaire, driven very much by Catholic social teaching and the preferential option for the poor. So we really need to think about this climate and environmental crisis in this manner now, and the injustice of it. And a few of you will have heard me speak about the lady in the photograph before. Her name is Joanna Sustento, and I walked with her on a pilgrimage a few years back from Italy to Poland. We were walking to the UN climate talks, and very much carrying the message of Laudato Si. But Joanna is just someone who has really suffered, in the sense she was caught up in Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines back in 2013, and would have lost her entire family, her parents, her sister, her sister-in-law, her brother, and her little 3-year-old nephew. She was the only person to survive in her house the night of Haiyan, and she's now very much a climate activist with Greenpeace. And in the Philippines, that's dangerous. And but you know, that's Joanna, a picture of her standing outside Shell's headquarters in Manila, in silence, just with a sign that says climate justice. So, you know, I think we need to tell these stories, and I could talk about countless examples from Tròcaire's partners overseas, and the suffering that is there in those communities, and how our work is trying to mitigate that as well, and so on. But just even creating spaces for these stories to be told. And I think another injustice that is about to happen is that these voices are being excluded from COP26 in Glasgow because of vaccine inequality. People cannot travel. Delegations are not being allowed to travel from countries on the red lists into the UK. So these voices are possibly going to be missing from the next UN climate talks as well. And you know, what we do about that as well. We can talk about it at the end. So where does all that leave us? Laudato Si very much calls us to an eco-conversion. There's this quote which actually comes from Pope Benedict, but he's quoted in Laudato Si. He says, "The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. For this reason, the ecological crisis is a summons to a profound interior conversion." So very much starting with our spirituality and our relationship with nature. And the conversion is threefold. There's personal, and then there's the community conversion, and then there's this ongoing piece that's, you know, difficult but needs nourishment. And faith communities have such an important role to play in this, because this comes down to what we value and what we care about, and how we move people's hearts to action. The personal eco-conversion, this quote in Laudato Si always speaks to me, where he says, "Our goal is to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what's happening to the world into our own personal suffering, and discover what each of us can do about it." And I suppose it comes with a bit of a warning, because it is painful to wake up to this crisis, and you need to mind yourself in that, and find people who are, who you find like-minded people that you can talk to about this, and spaces where you can be nourished as well, because any sort of activism requires that nourishment and care as well. But it's this ongoing piece of this painful experience can it can become self-destructive, but we approach it with caution, but also with the realization that we need to open our eyes to what's going on around us, and many people are not awake to this crisis at all. Again, that's a photograph from the pilgrimage, but one thing I learned on that pilgrimage from my Filipino friends was that just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. So if you think about 100 companies and the people who sit on the boards of those companies, you're talking about the fate of the world in the hands of a few thousand people. And what are those companies about? And that's why Pope Francis brought their CEOs to the Vatican and said, listen, we have to stop, literally keep it in the ground. We have to stop burning this stuff. And so they're just things for us to be aware of. I'd never, Colm spoke about the hybrid car there at the start, and that's brilliant. But I would never lay the blame of this crisis at the feet of individuals who are trying to live their lives and provide for their families. We do our bit, but this isn't. It's huge. It's a huge political revolution that's needed in order to address this, and I think that's what the youth climate movements are about. So when that's said and done, I just think, well, Pope Francis says in Laudato Si, where do we begin? Because this is so overwhelming, and we can be left feeling a bit lost in it, and that it's too huge. But he tells us very simply to begin by going back to nature and rekindling our sense of awe and wonder with creation, because that's where the problem is. It begins with this disconnection. We've removed ourselves from the natural world, and we could also spend a session talking about, that interpretation of Genesis and dominion and so on, and how that has evolved and changed. But that we need to really get over this anthropocentric view of the world and see ourselves as part of creation and deeply dependent on it. But also we need to fall in love with the earth again and not see it as something that's just for our use and abuse. So he points us back to St. Francis continuously in the document, and he says, St. Francis, faithful to scripture, invites us to see nature as a magnificent book in which God speaks to us and grants us a glimpse of his infinite beauty and goodness. And just, to say to you as well this evening, like, where's your favorite place in nature, and what does it mean to you? And there's these beautiful passages in Laudato Si that invites us into this reflection. Standing awestruck before a mountain, he or she cannot separate this experience from God. And we all have these special places. This is a photo of me and my friends climbing Carntúil, without doing much preparation for it, which I wouldn't recommend, but we made it safely to the top and back. That's my happy place in the mountains, and just we need to very much spend time in these spaces. So I love this quote from Richard Louv. Says, we cannot protect something we do not love. We cannot love what we do not know, and we cannot know what we do not see and touch and hear. So this can seem like a paradox when you take the enormity of the crisis, and then the solution in Laudato Si is first to go back to these spaces. But we call this in the movement the slow fast paradox, because we need to go slow for our eco conversion to happen and the spirituality to grow, and we need to go fast because of the urgency. So it's the slow fast paradox. And then just another really nice quote from Laudato Si: the entire material universe speaks of God's love, his boundless affection for our soil, mountains. Everything is, as it were, a caress of God. And again, we could spend a whole other session on, the new universe story and the cosmic Christ and what we're learning about this evolving universe and where we are in it. And You know, it's exciting and it's life-giving to me and to many people that we seem to be growing in this way in our spirituality, but I suppose just to be open to it and not to be afraid of it, and to invite others along the road as well with us. Just a couple more points about Laudato Si, and then I'm going to share with you the season of creation stuff. And sorry about all the text on the screen, you can just ignore most of it, but at the heart of Laudato Si is this concept of integral ecology, and there's a whole chapter on it, chapter 4, but it also it's the thread that runs through the whole document as well. And very simply what it means is that we can't separate the environmental issue from any other issue, social, political, economic, or cultural, even theological, because everything is interconnected. He talks about this web of life that we are deeply embedded in. And many of you will be familiar with those theologians there who've been writing on this for many, many years. And again, we're pointed back to St. Francis as the example par excellence of how to live out this integral ecology, and how inseparable the bond is between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. So when we're making a decision about anything, whether it's at government level or in our own households or in our parish, we need to keep in mind the interconnectedness of all things, and that this integral ecology is embedded in all that we do. And even in a synodal process, I feel, this should be at the heart of it, that we embrace this integral ecology, that this isn't just something, we'll have a side workshop over there about this issue. No, this has to form part of all our decision making going forward, because it affects everything. So we're called to a profound interior conversion. And this quote from Laudato Si says we need an ecological conversion where the effects of our encounter with Jesus Christ become evident in our lives and in our relationship with the world around us. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It's not an optional or secondary aspect of our Christian experience. And just to say, that quote it's very deep, and when you reflect on it, I'm sure lots of different thoughts come to mind, but what does this look like in your faith community setting? Where does care for a common home sit? Is it part of an integral ecology? And I think as church, we have to provide spaces for this eco-conversion to happen. So it deeply affects how we pray and worship and do liturgy, the spaces we create for people, as well as the activism piece, which I'm coming to now in a second. And before I get into the season of creation, just there's some beautiful passages in Laudato Si around, the gospel of creation, and really looking at Jesus's relationship with the natural world, which we tend not to think about too often, but most of his parables evoke images from nature. I'd say nearly all of them do. And when we think about his earthly life and the connection with nature, and journeying with fishermen, preaching in boats on the sea, going away from quiet places to pray, son of a carpenter working with woods most of his life, all of those things that we tend just not to bring to mind, and to really just to pray with that, and to think a bit more deeply about Christ's relationship with nature. And Laudato Si brings this out beautifully as well, that quote at the end, the very flowers of the field and the birds which his human eyes contemplated and admired are now imbued with his radiant presence. So very much being invited to see the risen Christ in all of creation as well. The last bit of Laudato Si I want to highlight is this question, which it's in the chapter on integral ecology, but it talking about intergenerational justice and this very important question, which says, what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? So the justice issue extends to generations and generations and generations of people who will come after us. And this is what the rise of the youth climate movement is about as well. These young people who are just amazing and so committed and can clearly see where things are headed and are saying, hang on a second, you have no right to continue down this path and mess around with our futures. So this lady gives me great hope, as well as Laudato Si and Pope Francis, Greta, whom we're all familiar with, I'm sure. And she says, we need hope, but the one thing we need more than hope is action. And she says, once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for hope, look for action. Then and only then hope will come. And this I have learned to be true, that you'll find hope when you start to act. And that just has such a ripple effect on a community or on a group of people, and on the individuals in that group as well. And we start with ourselves, spending more time in nature and nourishing ourselves in that way. And Pope Francis says, the antidote against the sickness of not taking care of our common home is contemplation. So really taking that to heart and giving it the time it needs and deserves. And as I said, faith communities have an enormous role to play in this, in terms of providing space for this eco-conversion to happen, but also mobilizing and taking action as well. And Donald Doerr's latest book, A Creed for Today, he talks about, obviously this need for eco-spirituality, but that it must be at the heart of all aspects of Christian spirituality going forward. And which brings nourishment and life, and it does bring nourishment and life. And he says, when things seem hopeless, we must remember that down through Christian history, there has been a succession of heroic people who've been inspired by Jesus and led by his Spirit to follow his example in taking on apparently impossible tasks. And they challenge us to do the same. And the challenge of today is the ecological crisis. And there are great people all around doing amazing things, but, is local church where we are tapping into that, is the question. So I'm going to whiz through the season creation resources and then stop talking so we can have a little bit of discussion. So, the season of creation, as Colin said, runs from the 1st of September to the 4th of October. It started in the Orthodox Church in 1989, who proclaimed the 1st of September as the day of prayer for creation. And many Christians around the world have embraced this idea since. And Pope Francis, only in 2015, but still in 2015, officially declared the 1st of September the World Day of Prayer for creation in the Catholic calendar. So it's very much an ecumenical season. 2.2 billion Christians in the world potentially celebrating the season of creation together. And I'm on the Laudato Si working group, which is a working group of the Irish Bishops' Conference. And the working group's in existence since 2016. So it was set up just a year after Laudato Si. And there's lots of interesting people on the working group. And for the past 3 years, we've created resources for use in Ireland. So we kind of take the international theme and see what might work in our own context. So that's the list of resources that are available. Lots of stuff in terms of addressing ecological spirituality. Certainly everything you need is there. I'll tell you where to get them now in a second. And including a podcast this year from Bishop Martin Hayes, who is the new bishop for Laudato Si in Ireland, and he's really enthusiastic and supportive, and has given lots of interesting reflections recently on this. So to highlight one of the resources, there's a lovely tree planting resource. So just to encourage faith communities to plant Irish native trees whenever they can. And We've teamed up with Easy Treasy so that, you know, to ensure this is done correctly and all the advice you need is there, and they're very willing to help people with questions and stuff. And there's beautiful prayers in the document as well. So what I like about these resources is it says the season of creation on them, but they could be used any time of the year. And I think the Faith Communities Pollinator Plan you're familiar with as well. It's just another easy way to start in a church setting, and you can involve lots of different groups with this as well. Easy Treasy are hoping to plant 1 million trees in Ireland by 2030, and they're looking for community groups like parishes to help them to do that. So it's just about looking at the land that's there in a parish and what could be done with it. There's a beautiful brochure, thanks to the JPIC group in the Diocese of Kerry, and just really colourful and lots of tips on this brochure for prayer, reflection and action. And you know, you could have these printed locally and given out, but again, they're suitable for all year round. So a lovely resource to share with people. And Bonnybrook Parish put together a PowerPoint that's like 40 acts of love for the season of creation, and for social media, but also in a church, a really practical action for each day. Their Care for Creation group had done that. So you'll find all of this on the Bishops' Conference website. Go into the search bar there and put in Season of Creation, and the 2021 resource will come up. And they're also on the Tròcaire website under Parish Season of Creation as well. And just to say, you know, Archbishop Dermot Farrell has released a new pastoral letter on this issue, and it's excellent. It's a really compelling document. So, you know, maybe a group might like to get together and read it. It's 64 pages, but it's very well worth a read as well. So I'm just going to skip to the end because I'm conscious of time, but the Eco Congregation Ireland are definitely worth checking out in terms of the Eco Parish Awards and the Climate Justice Candle. Many parishes have started this way, you know, forming a little group, doing an eco checkup, and then progressing along the awards. So definitely worth having a look at that. I'm involved with the Fridays for Future Movements, which meet at the Dáil on a Friday at 1 o'clock. And just to say, on September 24th, there is another global strike. Now, obviously, if it's safe to do so with COVID regulations and so on, but you know, a group can gather in some way. We sometimes meet online, we sometimes meet at the Dáil, and it's an ongoing. We're on the 145th week of this now, which is pretty amazing. So, something that would certainly engage young people. And Dundrum Parish at the last major one of these 2 years ago, you know, got involved and did this outside the church, which was quite interesting. So finally, I want to highlight the petition for the COP to you and ask you to take an action today and as we go forward. So we know there's a very important UN climate conference happening in Glasgow in November. We know Pope Francis is attending on the first day. And this petition, which is, you'll find it at healthyplanetandpeople.org, is a petition endorsed by the Vatican for COP26. And we really need people's help in getting signatures onto this petition. And just to say, you know, these climate conferences, progress is dead slow. This is the 26th year of the UN climate conference. We're still very much talking at these conferences, even in spite of the Paris Agreement. So Laudato Si acknowledges that, and Pope Francis calls them out on it. And you know, this petition is part of an effort to push for momentum at this conference, because in previous years, NGOs and civil society groups would very much drive momentum from the outside of these conferences in terms of activism and protests and so on. That's a photo from COP24. You know, really asking the delegates, which side are you on? What are you doing? And that's going to be absent in Glasgow, and that momentum will be absent. So this petition is one way that we can really drive up support, especially considering Pope Francis is going to be attending that first day. So what we're asking people to do is to go to the website at the bottom, healthyplanetandpeople.org. You can also use the URL, thecatholicpetition.org, and depending on your setting, which one you'd prefer to use, and to sign the petition. And I'll tell you what the 4 asks of it are, but to set you a challenge as well that, you know, can you find 20 other people to sign it after you've signed it? Can your organization sign up as a partner to the petition? So these are all little things that are going on, and there's 4 asks in the petition, urging world leaders to tackle climate and biodiversity crises together as part of one and the same crisis, to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and promise no more biodiversity loss. The third one is on climate finance and providing supports for countries that are most affected by climate change, even though they've done nothing to cause it. And the 4th ask is on protecting the rights of Indigenous communities and really listening to those communities, because they are the wisdom and the custodians of the land. So you can also collect physical signatures, and if that's more your thing, I can talk to you about that afterwards. But this is a critical moment in the run up to COP26. It really is a key moment, and in the season of creation, we're really asking people to make this the key piece of activism and to get people to sign Healthy Planet and People. If we had 500,000 signatures going with Pope Francis to the COP, it would be quite a statement. So I'm going to stop there because I've talked for far too much, but I'll leave you with this image of Greta, who sat alone outside the Swedish Parliament in 2018 and kickstarted a movement of millions and millions of people around the world. So just not to forget the power of small actions, and to leave you with that reflection there. And I'm going to stop sharing now.
Great. Many thanks. Many thanks for that, Jane. I'm going to pass on to John. John, will you look after the Q&A, please?
I will, Colin. I might suggest that we just take a couple of minutes, give Jane a bit of a breathing space for 1 or 2 minutes, so that people can maybe, if they wish to type some questions into the chat. But we have a small number here, so we can also take questions, I think, via just putting your hand up, or you can use the special hand in the reactions space. But maybe just take a couple of minutes initially, just to give Jane a bit of a breather, and give yourselves time to think as well, you know, about all that's been said. And thank you, Jane. It's very inspiring, and so much information there, and it certainly brought new perspectives on Laudato Si to me. So thank you. So we'll just take 1 or 2 minutes before we get the Q&A going. Okay, we'll get ourselves started. I see Maeve, you've put your hand up there, so you're first in.
Well, the one glaring thing in my parish that just glares out at us has been reduced because of the pandemic. Thanks be to God. But the only thing I can say, thanks be to God, about the pandemic is that there are thousands of mass leaflets every Sunday and bulletins that go into the bin the next day. They're not even used in school on a Monday. All because the PP doesn't like IT and he won't have screens up for people to look at. No, I mean, why can that not be dealt with at the Austin level? It's okay, the PP can't do everything. I'm not asking him to do everything, but there are people in the parish that he can stop looking and can encourage. You know, sorry, that's my grouse for tonight. And thank you for sharing again.
No problem. Yeah, it's but I think we're back to the eco conversion piece. So many people don't see it, and until you see it, then you see it everywhere. First of all, you can't stop seeing it. And how do we motivate people to want to care more deeply for our surroundings and for, you know, our common home in general? It's down to values, and it's definitely down to this eco conversion piece. So yeah, I'm not surprised.
Thanks, Maeve. Thanks, Jane, for your response. Just a question in the chat from Gina. I have found nothing in Laudato Si about population growth and family planning. If Francis is listening to the science, this seems a strange omission.
Yeah, and this comes up on occasion. There's a section in Laudato Si on throwaway culture, and in it, he does raise the issue of abortion and so on. But I suppose that's the only real reference to population growth that I can think of. And obviously, church teaching and that is very, very clear. But I suppose there isn't consensus out there that the world's population is the issue. That, you know, to use the phrase, there's enough for everyone's needs, but not for everyone's greed. The issue is inequality. 80% of the world's resources are being used by 20% of the world's people. So the issue is very much inequality before it's about population. But there, yeah, you're right. There's no that's not developed in Laudato Si, and so many things are not said in Laudato Si as well. It doesn't do everything. It's not a complete the complete story, so to speak. So that's just a few thoughts on that one.
Just a question for myself before I go back to the chat again. You've worked with Laudato Si for a long time now, Jane. Have you found, and it seems that it's been a well-received document and it's been read by both believers and non-believers, as you say, alike. But did you find that it didn't have the same clout, I suppose, as it might have if it was a purely secular document? That it would have been better received or better used or better referenced, or
what do you mean if it was a document that
it wasn't church based,
that wasn't church based?
Yeah.
No, like, I mean, we need this sort of witness and leadership in church, and we can only, you know, you find your community and your network from which to act out of. There are plenty of secular environmental movements out there, and what faith communities bring to this crisis is the ability to address the spiritual aspect of it and the value aspect of it, and that space to move people's hearts and to really to think deeply about creation. And I think, yeah, that's the really interesting piece that Laudato Si brings to the table. as well as it being open to the interfaith dialogue very much, and it comes out very strongly in that as well, that, you know, the religions of the world coming together on this issue, that's an enormous movement of people. So yeah, I didn't come away from it feeling that would it have put some people off that it was a religious document? Sure, absolutely. But I think, you know, we speak out of our context, and this Laudato Si is very much church-based context. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Margaret, I know is looking to make a comment, but before I come to you, Margaret, I'm just going to go back to a comment that's in the chat from Bernard. Wonderfully helpful, Jane. Thank you. The gaze of Jesus picture is a white Jesus. As we know, Jesus was not white. Black Lives Matter. And then Margaret is responding to that, perhaps. Well, at least there is a response there from Margaret. He wasn't black either.
Sure.
But, and she wants to give a quote as well. But so that's fine. I don't know if you have any response to that, Jane.
No, I actually wasn't conscious of the photograph. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. And usually that's something I'm careful about, but yeah, it's funny because I have an Indian Jesus as a picture in the room I'm in here, so I very much had different images of Jesus that I would use myself for prayer, but yeah, thanks for that. I'll do something about that slide. I actually wasn't aware. I actually didn't realize.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Margaret, you're muted. You're muted, Margaret, by the way. Got you now.
I'm paraphrasing slightly Michel Foist, who of course was speaking in the 60s. So he talks about men all the time, so we'll change it slightly. But all people are our brothers and sisters. The blood of Christ made us children of the same Father. When a member of the family suffers and dies, the other members grieve. Since we know now that millions of people die of hunger every year, we can no longer live as before. Even if my means permit it, a mode of living beyond that which is fitting and necessary is a sin, he says. I repeat, it is a sin to live without fighting with all our might, where we are, for justice in the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Anybody else has any questions or comments? Oh, Denise, yeah, see you there. And Brian next then.
Jane, thank you. That was excellent and so informative, but also challenging. And I'd read a little while back that Greta Thunberg was suggesting that we didn't go ahead with the COP26 this year for the very reason that you're suggesting. There won't be the massive sort of presentation from civil society and all the climate activists. Have you any idea why, the UN insisted on going ahead? They wouldn't defer it like the next year. And was there any real discussion about that?
No, but I know, like last week, Climate Action Network, which is an international body, one of the largest international bodies in terms of NGOs on climate action, called for it to be postponed because of the lack of inclusion of red listed countries, and they were really calling on the UK government to create spaces for quarantine for delegates to travel from the global south. And that's not happening, and they're encouraging delegations from these countries to join virtually. And these countries are always at a disadvantage at the COP because of the size of the negotiation teams from countries in the global north, for example, and so on. But this time around, the injustice is even more apparent because the reason they can't travel is because of vaccine inequality. So this is where integral ecology comes in. You have multiple crises coming together. I mean, I heard a shocking statistic in one of our partner countries the other day, you know, where in Ireland we're at 85% or 90% fully vaccinated, and these particular countries were at 2.5%.
Yes.
And so that's the reality of that situation. Now, why the UN are going ahead with the COP? I mean, this COP is so important, is one side of it. We don't have time here. You know, time is very much running out. Now, does that mean that this COP is going to solve everything? No, because there's been 26 of them and they haven't done that to date. But yeah, the push is to let it happen. And I suppose the other push is that they open up Glasgow to these delegations from countries where vaccines aren't available, and they do that in a safe manner. And you know, as far as I'm aware, Greta isn't attending in protest of this, and many other people and organizations aren't engaging with the COP for this reason. So yeah, it's not a simple situation, but the absence of civil society is also deeply concerning. So there's both are there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask Jane, can you hear me?
Yep.
Jane, first of all, thank you so much. It's just wonderful to see someone like you so engaged, so committed, and so devoted and dedicated to what, to my mind, is the issue for us as Christians at the moment. But I plead ignorance here. Is there anything happening at the catechesis level in terms of our schools? I mean, I was talking to I did teach in high school myself in New York, but I mean, I did hear some kids the other day saying, like, when they graduate, they're going to be climate activists, which is, of course, inspirational. But is there anything at the institutional level here in Ireland doing a catechesis around how important climate change is and how much it must be part of our commitment to the gospel?
Education.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I suppose just to say the Laudato Si working group sits under the Council for Catechetics. Many people are confused by that because they're like, surely it should be in justice and peace. But when it began, it was felt it needed to be in the Council for Catechetics because, first of all, this was an issue around education and spirituality. So it's just good to know that. And because of that, it has been able to contribute to the RE curriculums and trying to embed Laudato Si in primary and secondary school education in that way. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is, I think, like a lot of things, it depends on the school and the ethos of the school. And I suppose we would do CPD sessions with teachers on Laudato Si. We would be invited to present to school principals at different levels, and that is ongoing. And then it's, you know, does that take root? Does that move someone's heart and whet their appetite to take this back to their school and to really drive it, because it needs that, very much so needs that. And then you have schools that are very active on the Fridays for Future scenario, but might be missing the spirituality piece. So they might be really good at, you know, the green flag activism, climate strikers, all of that. But what's missing is the spirituality and Laudato Si bit. So it really varies. I suppose one of the things, and if you don't mind, I'll share just this slide with you. One of the things I'm excited about is the Laudato Si Action Platform, which is coming from the Vatican in October. So the Dicastery for Integral Human Development have come up with these 7 goals, and they're inviting church institutions on a journey to try and achieve these goals in the next 7 years. And you'll be hearing more about this, and I'd be happy to come back another time and share a bit more on it. But one of the institutions that it lists are schools, Catholic schools. So I'm quite excited about what this might look like in Catholic schools, and the Bishops' Conference are very much supportive of this platform. And we're talking about at the moment what this might look like in Ireland. And from Tròcaire's perspective, the development education team are going to pilot schools in the coming year to try and achieve these goals. So this is exciting, and this is coming directly through the institutional church as well. So a bit like the school trying to get the green flag, the school is now going to be trying to achieve the Laudato Si goals. And you could take any one of those goals and break it down into a million different parts. And some schools will be doing it already. But yeah, this is new, and this is coming. So it's just an example to me of the life of Laudato Si and how it's kind of flourishing in different ways still,
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Brian, I know you had a question, and just.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Jane, for really brilliant talk. I enjoyed it very much. It was just you mentioned near the start about the 5 dioceses in Ireland who have publicly kind of divested from fossil fuels, and I wondered. Well, I suppose I wondered why only 5, and I also wondered, is that information available somewhere?
Yeah.
One could look up whether one's
Absolutely.
own diocese has done it, and maybe sort of bring some pressure to bear if we haven't.
Yeah, I'll find a link for you now in a minute, because it is public. And just to say, the Irish Bishops' Conference as a group divested collectively. If you remember the eve of Pope Francis's visit to Ireland, there was this big announcement around divestment in Christchurch Cathedral that night. And then since then, the task was to divest individual dioceses. So 6 divested in May, and the next global announcement is in October, and we're working with a few on that. There's no reason for them not divesting, except that it just takes a little bit of time for a diocesan finance team to check that. And you're not talking, most dioceses don't have investments in fossil fuels for a start, but in order to work through and to check that is the case, and the same with a congregation or a university or whatever it might be, it just takes a little bit of time. So the 6 who divested in May, if I remember correctly, were Limerick, Kildare and Loughlin, Elphin, Clogher, Cloyne, and I'm missing one, but I'm going to put a link in the chat because there was an excellent webinar that Bishop Leahy participated in alongside Bill McKibben, who's one of the most famous activists in America. And so it was this global webinar all about divestment, and it very much lists, who divested in May. And if you go onto the Laudato Si movement's website, you can read all about divestment and church. It's really interesting. Well, if you're into it, it's interesting. But it's just such a good news story as well. So I'll find that link for you now and put it in there. But I think Killala was the other diocese actually. So yeah, if your diocese isn't there in the list yet, feel absolutely free to pop them a note, because we are liaising with them to try and encourage them just to move on it also. So yeah.
Thanks, Jane. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Yes.
Hi, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, about the the companies are more important than the individual actions, So apart from the oil companies, what are the other companies in Ireland that are responsible for damaging the climate?
Yeah, good question. I think I don't have an answer really,
Yeah,
except to say that coal, oil and gas are the big
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah,
So I'm sure we can all think of campaigns that are out there
yeah,
to stop further extraction of coal, oil and gas. If you think about where our electricity comes from, and stations like Money Points, who are importing coal from Colombia and so on and so forth, now that is being phased out and there is a plan for that. But even to look at things like fast fashion, where our clothes are coming from, and I can't name an individual company, but to think about the life cycle of a product and who's in that chain and where our stuff is coming from and how it is being produced, and you do have to do a little bit of investigation around that, but and it is a rabbit hole, because once you start we're back then to the circular economy. How can we get out of that cycle, so there's plenty of unethical products out there, so I think we need to make choices. How can we buy more ethically, more fair trade, more secondhand, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, thank you.
Just that link that I put in the chat is the link to the divestment webinar, but also there's information on that page about divestment as well. So
I see a comment from Kay in the chat there. Great talk, Jane, very inspiring and also challenging. I can only keep hope alive that each one of us can embrace the challenge in our own areas of living and in this way make a difference to the local community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where faith communities have a really important role to play as well, especially Christianity, because we're in the Good Friday of the environmental crisis, and we know that's not the end of the story, and definitely the hope is coming through action. So we can't just be fatalistic about it, and apathy won't help us either. So we've no choice but to be hope-filled, even though it can be very difficult to do that. But I would just, really appeal to you all this evening to try and get as many signatures onto this petition as possible. That is definitely the key action between now and November. And we've a target in Ireland to try and achieve 10,000 signatures. We're nowhere near that yet. But if parishes and groups took it on, then that could definitely turn around. And someone set me that challenge a while back, saying, oh, well, if you've signed it, can you get so many other people to sign it? So maybe set yourself a target as well of 10 or 20 people, that you might be able to sign it. And anyone can sign it. It doesn't have to be a Catholic thing, even though it's called the Catholic petition. But back to our common home, this affects us all. So
thank you, Jane. And thank you, everybody, for your questions and your comments. And thank you, Jane, for your interaction with all of that. Colm, I'll hand it back to you.
Clap for this.
A Zoom clap. Thank you.
And now I'd like to hand over to Nieves. If you could say a few words of thanks, please, Nieves, on our behalf.
Yes, Jane, it had been a wonderful talk, and there are so much information and ideas that it will take me a while to digest all this. I was taking notes, and the thing at the beginning, it was quite discouraging when we saw those awful pictures of all the disasters, and it was like a journey from discouragement to hope. And the hope first, when we saw that you talk about global actions, by huge groups that we think, wow, they can do something, they can do something. But then when you talk about the spirituality side, when the ecological conversion, when you see that thing, the ecology is something more than politics, or that is God is there. I mean, in the bottom, in the root, is go back to the Genesis, to the origins, and that the earth or planet is our home. And we have seen with the pandemic how united are all. We are all in the same boat. So I love that personal eco conversion to do an active prayer, join groups, because we can do a lot. It must be now. We must be millions doing our little things from choosing our rubbish and our bins, to take more careful about that thing about recycle things. I have discovered, for example, my chapel in my garden. I never been too much involved with my garden until last year. I plant 3 little trees, and I remember last winter, I couldn't sleep thinking about, my God, maybe they can frost, or they can die tomorrow. I mean, when you are in touch with the earth, just simply in a flower pot in your garden, you get that feeling that really communicate with that thing, and it is like an active prayer. And I thank you for all the links and all those things, because yes, we can do something. The problem with bad news is when they say, God, I cannot do anything. But in that case, there is hope, and there is action, and faith with action is nothing. And thank you. I think that all of us, we know now, we have a lot of, a huge spectrum of choices at all levels to act. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nieves, for that. Thank you very much. Jane, I was interested that you said that actions are important. To actually be out there, getting wet, standing in front of a building, holding a placard. Celine and I went along, was it 2 years ago, in that march where you had loads of photographs. It was a beautiful day. We started in front of the Custom House and we marched around and up and over. It was amazing, just amazing to be out there with a huge number of people like that and marching. And I'm involved in various campaign groups, and I'm always trying to get a few people to stand outside with placards, whatever it is. Yeah. It does make a difference. You know, I think 10 people with placards is worth 10,000 signatures in an online petition sometimes, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
While standing outside and doing things there. I just need to just make a few announcements about what's coming up. Our next meeting is on the 12th of October, when we have Bishop Paul Dempsey addressing us, and he's going to talk about the National Synodal Assembly. So we're delighted that he's agreed to come on a Zoom talk, and we'll do a Q&A session with us as well. That's on the 12th of October. We'll be sending out notices about that. In November, it's probably going to be the 9th of November, we'll have Father Kieran O'Mahony talking about adult faith formation. And again, we'll be sending out more news about that. And just today, I've confirmed that on the 7th of December, we'll have Professor Joanna Rahner, who's a theologian from Germany, together with Sister Sabine Schratz, are going to, who's a Dominican here in Dublin. They're going to be here in person to tell us about the German synodal path, which Joanna Rammer is very actively involved in herself, and she's been hitting the headlines over in Germany about that. We had hoped to have them a year ago, but the pandemic got in the way. And both of them have insisted for the last year, they don't want to do Zoom meetings. They will only do in-person meetings. So for that meeting on the 7th of December, I don't know yet where it's going to be. We were in Mercy International Centre, and I have to talk to them in October to see if they're going to open up again. So it remains to be seen. So we may be in Mercy International Centre, we may be somewhere else, but the date is fixed because Joanna Ranner is coming over here on another visit. So there are three meetings that we have lined up coming up. And of course, we'll be sending you emails and newsletters, and it'll be on our website and our Facebook page as well. Very good. Well, thank you all very much. I'll put the petition up online. I think I already had it up before, Jane, but I'll make sure I have it up at the top of our Facebook page. You know the way, once it disappears down,
Yeah.
It's gone. So I'll make sure I get it back up there.
Thanks so much.
I'll try and get the 20 as well and work at that. And to do that. And the talk will be put up there as well. Yes. Well, John will look after that. Yeah. Joe, will you do a closing prayer for us, please?